Welcome to Biztech's Startup Show, where we feature startup companies across industries as they build and scale their businesses. Today, we feature an entrepreneur, Alvin Poh, the founder and CEO of Superscaling. Now, Alvin started his venture at the tender age of 17. And at 33 years old, he was able to sell his company Vodian in 2017 for $30 million. Now, without further ado, let's introduce Alvin to the show. Alvin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Super fun to be here.
Now, Alvin, you've got a fantastic journey. Walk us through Alvin, the entrepreneur, starting Vodian, and then kicking start the business.
I was always a very entrepreneurial kid. Back when I was in primary school at the age of like 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe, I was already like finding entrepreneurial stuff to do.
Were you selling erasers to your friends?
Yes, country flag erasers. Kind of like what Squid Game, that game they played at the train station was like. You had to flip your eraser so that it lands on top of your opponent's eraser. And in doing so, you would win that piece. So that was the game that everybody played in primary school back then. What I discovered was that the bookstore in my neighborhood sold country erasers cheaper than like the bookstore at my school. So I realized that I could actually buy the erasers and sell them to my classmates. We're not talking about like millions of dollars of profit here, by the way. We're talking about like, I don't know, cents, enough so that, you know, after a few days, I could probably buy a bowl of noodles at the school canteen. But for me, that was enough. That was happy. My family wasn't very well to do, so they gave me enough for like the basics, right? Transportation and for like lunch at the school canteen. But if I wanted like snacks or hanging out with my friends, I needed to find that money myself. And so I guess I kind of got forced into entrepreneurship, figuring out like how I could raise money, even from a pretty young age. And you know, I started programming also when I was like, I think 12 or 13 years old. My dad, he became a salesperson, and because he needed to do his paperwork and stuff, he got a computer. And when he wasn't working on the computer, I was using the computer, just like, you know, playing around with it, like getting familiar with it. Absolutely loving it. I think one of the things that I was like fascinated with was the internet. Back then, my whole life was my school friends, and my neighbors at home. That was it. But with the internet, there was software like MIRC that is kind of like the granddaddy of Slack. It basically is a chat software. That allowed me to speak with people from all over, not just all over Singapore, but all over the world. And it was amazing. So I spent so much time on that chat software. And that also got me hooked on programming, you know, graphics design and scripting as well, because I could actually change how MIRC looked like with like your own theme and your own like graphics packs. And that's what I did. So that was my foray into like computer programming and graphics design and all of those things. So much so that my relative actually asked me to design his website for him. I think I was like 15 at that time.
Okay, so that was your foray into commercialization as such.
Yes. Well, he didn't actually pay me a lot, to be honest, but more importantly was my mind was like blown by the fact that somebody was willing to pay me for the knowledge that I had as a computer, like, you know, programmer, a web designer. I didn't even know how to design websites at that point in time. I just said yes because, like, you know, I was a kid and I didn't know better. So I said yes, and then figured things out online. Back then there wasn't even Google, but there was still search engines around like Alta Vista and I can't remember what else. I don't know, Yahoo or something. And you could still like find stuff online and you learn from that. And that's how I learned the basics of web design, and I created websites from there. That became my first like proper business, I think. And that's how I got started at the age of about 15 or 16.
And then you started Vodian at 17. How did you transition to that?
Wow. At 16 was when I did my O levels. Okay. And I told my parents that, you know, I don't like exams. I was such a mischievous kid. So I went to school. I took the O levels. I did well enough to get into a JC, a junior college, and that was my parents. It was their dream, I guess, because the route to a university is a lot easier once you get into a junior college. But for me, when I got to a junior college, I was devastated because I thought it would be more fun than secondary school. It turned out to be worse. It turned out to be very regimental, and I hated the subjects that I had to study. So I told my parents, you know, to let me go to a polytechnic where I could actually study computers and technology and programming and all of that. But it was a 3-year course, and my parents were very worried that I couldn't go to a university after that. So that was when I made a promise to my parents that, you know, I wanted to go to a polytechnic. It was a longer route, but because of that, I would promise them that I would go to a university, get a degree, and you know, then they'll be like, you know, assured, I guess. So I stuck to that promise, and eventually through poly and through university, I graduated and got my degree. It was the good thing though was because of that. The very first day of my polytechnic education, that was orientation, right? The very first day I sat down in the auditorium beside this guy that would later turn out to be my business founder. We, of course, became friends first, started talking, started doing everything in school. And, you know, I think that that relationship slowly evolved into a working relationship, a business relationship with him, right? And that wouldn't have ever happened if I didn't go to a polytechnic.
Yeah, so you took the unconventional route.
Yeah, I did. I did. Out of ignorance, I guess, because back then, again, as a kid, just wanted to do whatever you felt like doing, I guess.
And then when you started the business, well, formally at 17, how did you kind of start it? I mean, where did you get funding from, and how did you grow the business to the size that you did?
We didn't even get funding. At a point in time, I think starting a business needed about $110 or so just to register the name, and that was it. So we were so young, we couldn't even register a business on our own back then. In Singapore, I think they needed you to be at least 21. Okay. So we got my dad to do all of that. He registered the business and he set up the bank account and he was the signatory. So I had like the support of my father and excuse me, and I'm so grateful for that because I literally had to ask him to go down to meetings where he would have to sign documents, not even knowing what it was all about on our behalves, because we couldn't do it as teenagers back then. And that's how we got started. We were bootstrapped 100% of the way. We started with a service-based business because service-based businesses are basically like kind of like jobs almost, where you trade time for money. We were basically trading our time for the projects that we could take on, the client projects, the web design projects. That gave us the initial amount that we needed to actually start Vodian, the web hosting business, because that was a bit more capital intensive.
And the web hosting business, you probably started that off by reselling other people's websites, right?
Yes, 100%. That was how we discovered that was a viable market, because we were resellers in the first place and we tried out so many different companies. It wasn't just one partnership and then we stuck with it all the time. It was always one partnership, and then after that we discovered there was some disappointing part of it, and then we switched, hoping to get a better experience. But in the end, we kept getting let down and disappointed. And it wasn't just us getting disappointed, it was our customers that were, bearing the brunt of it. Because essentially what happens is that we were like a middleman because we were reselling people's services. And
exactly. So all the control is basically with them, not with you.
Yeah, we were literally like a conduit, right? Like if the website went down, the customers would be pissed off. They contacted us, and then we could do nothing but contact the person that we got the services from, and we were just like relaying information back and forth. And a lot of times they were either unresponsive, not responding enough or fast enough, not responding knowledgeably enough, or one or more of these reasons, right? And so that was why we discovered that these are the customer pain points that we wanted to solve. And that gave us the confidence to really go into hosting ourselves, because we knew exactly what we could fix that was not working.
So what you did was, I think for the next step, you would have probably went and rented some rack space, bought a server, and then off you went. Then you started to control the process.
Yeah, absolutely true. But I wouldn't say some. It was literally one server. We only had enough to buy one server, one physical server. It will cost us about 4,000 Singapore dollars.
Okay. And
we just bought enough space for that. It was just, I think, 2U. They go by U spaces, right? So one rack is about 42. We got like 1 or 2 U's, just enough to put in our server. And that was it, right? We had 100% of our business on that one physical server. And these are enterprise servers, but they are just computers at the end of the day. And computers always go down, they always break. We were literally sitting on the edge of our seats for the 2 or 3 months that we first had that server, because we were so afraid that our business would just go down with the server if anything happened.
Right.
So thankfully, after about 3 months or so, we got raised enough money again to actually invest into our next server, so that we could actually like balance things out 50-50. And that made things so much better. But that was how we started. It was not a case of us having like $1 million and then like investing it into a bunch of servers and hardware. It was really being so lean and so careful with our spending that we had to actually, squeeze every cent and get like the maximum ROI out of everything that we did.
Now, Alvin, looking back, and you sold your company, you started at 17 and you sold it at age 33.
Yeah.
So literally half your life at that time was spent with this business. What do you think were the key success factors that allowed you to grow Vodian?
I think one of the most incredible lessons that I got from that, right, is to be like absolutely spot on what your customer pain points are. Because if you create a business that focuses on solving those pain points and problems, then what you're doing is essentially creating value. And when you do that, people are definitely going to be wanting that solution. I think sometimes businesses tend to focus on what they think is cool or is what the industry needs, but might not necessarily get that kind of traction because it's really not solving any pain points or any problems. For us, because we were customers ourselves, we were reselling web hosting, we knew the ins and outs and the customer pain points so well that when we started Vodian, that was the number one thing we focused on. We had absolutely nothing else on our priority list except to provide customer support. Like, we made sure that if people called us, no matter what time of the day, they will get us, they will get hold of us, and we could fix their problem for them. That was something that was unheard of in the hosting space back then in 2002.
Okay, so then Alvin, that was your differentiator in the market space.
Yeah, back then, that was how we started.
Okay, and then what were the strategies that you used for customer acquisition?
For us, we grew organically from there for at least another 8 years.
Okay.
And then after that, we started acquiring companies.
Okay, so how did you make that leap of faith? When did you realize that you were big enough? What was the size of business were you at when you realized, hey, we need to start looking at acquiring businesses?
The funny thing is, we didn't do that. Like, what happened was, we were actually growing at a pretty good size. At a point of time, I think we were mid 6 figures revenue a year in Singapore dollars. Okay. And we were definitely like doing something right at that point of time, but we weren't like actually looking at how we could get to the next level that quick. Okay. What happened though was that because of what we were doing, people knew and saw us as a viable like competitor in the space,
Okay.
And somebody in that space was actually looking to exit. He wanted to sell, and literally like he wanted to move out of the country, migrate out of the country. And so he couldn't run the business anymore. He was looking for people to buy it over. And we were one of the people that he contacted just because of our reputation and standing in the market. So I definitely think it was like luck as well. We had to be, of that size, of that capability, of that reputation in order for him to have approached us. We didn't even know whether it was a viable thing to do at that point in time, but we just went for it. It was the fastest deal that we actually did, because I think he was on a pretty short notice, and he wanted a decision real quick. So I think we decided on that day itself to just go ahead with the deal.
But how do you finance it? Did he vendor finance it, or how did?
No, at the point of time, it wasn't a very, very big acquisition, but for us, I think we already we ran the business for 8 years. We had enough retained profits to actually acquire this company. Again, it wasn't very big. It was like the low 6-figure range, I think.
Okay.
So that was our first acquisition.
And obviously that gave you the confidence as well.
Yes, because we realized that ROI was real and could be achieved after that.
And how can I ask you, because a lot of times mergers and acquisitions in big companies, the payback is often very spotty. The promise pre-acquisition and post-acquisition is very different. Yeah. How was it for you, that first acquisition?
So there are many different reasons and many different objectives of M&As, right? Sometimes you want to acquire revenue, you want to acquire customers, you want to acquire talent, you want to acquire IP, whatever, right? There are so many reasons why you acquire companies. For us, it was purely because of the brand, the revenue, the customers. When we did an acquisition, for us, it was pretty straightforward, because hosting is a subscription-based business.
Yeah.
And we knew also, based on the CRM that you use, what your billing history looked like with your customers, what your churn rates are, all those things, right? And then we also know your financials, because we would know how much you spend on hardware, how you optimize your hardware, what kind of hardware you used. And when we combine these things together, we could roughly tell your performance. And based on that, then there will be a valuation affixed to it, and we could see whether or not it was something that was worthwhile for us to go into, because we'll be able to tell a rough ROI on that also.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did it pay? So how did it pay off for you? Did you squeeze more revenue out of that same customer base? Did you drive efficiencies from that? How did that pay off for you, that first acquisition?
So we realized that the way we handled and ran our operations in our company was so different from the other people who are running hosting businesses. And most of these businesses tend to be smaller. They either ran it as a side hustle, they had other businesses as the front. They could be, I don't know, design businesses or whatever it is, right? That had a hosting arm. Right. And these are the people that we will acquire. Because once we acquired them, on paper, the financials will probably give you an ROI of a certain amount. But we also knew that when we acquired them, we could really potentially increase the efficiency and optimization so much so that the ROI could be achieved much faster. In terms of the servers that they used, right? They could be using unoptimized servers that were running on old hardware, causing a lot of problems and having a lot of customer dissatisfaction. We could come in and fix all of that. So that helped us get ROI a lot quicker.
I see. And so then ran a successful business for many years, half your life, literally. Then you had an offer to get acquired.
Yeah.
What was the motivation, and how did you feel after you sold the company?
So we were the market leaders in Singapore. So we actually had a lot of people approaching us for M&A offers. People from Europe, Japan, New Zealand, the US. And this happened on almost a quarterly basis, because every single time there will be a exhibition or conference in Singapore, these people will definitely come knocking and come looking for us. So we had a lot of acquisition offers throughout the years, especially from like 2015 onwards. We didn't go ahead with any of them though, except with Dreamscape, because Dreamscape had a story that was very similar to ours. They were also founder-led. They were also bootstrapped all the way. They grew from nothing to being the market leader in Australia. And the uncanny thing was, even our offices in the Philippines were just next to each other. And so we thought that it was a very similar background, similar story, and that got us very comfortable with them. Initially, the experience or the intent was to actually get together as a merger so that we could then expand into Southeast Asia together. But I'm sure you know how M&As go. It typically doesn't really work out the way that you plan. And after a year, I think my co-founder and I, we felt like, you know, the management styles were different and we decided to leave. That was in 2018.
So then you went traveling for a couple of years. And then what made you think about starting up super scaling?
That's such a long story in itself. So I after the acquisition, a lot of people approached me for advice, business advice.
Okay.
They are startups or businesses, and people from my alma mater as well, even students. And I never really was able to help them because they'll typically approach me with a question like, how do I scale my business, or how do I fix my hiring processes, or how do I actually do this or do that, right? But I had this problem because it was so difficult to understand where they are coming from, what they've tried, what their context was, you know, and all those things. It was so difficult. So for me, I felt like, you know, even if I could tell them something, I don't know if it will help or harm them, because, you know, advice is it's so difficult to frame. And that was when I discovered I needed a framework. This, by the way, was something that I learned after attending a snowboarding instructor course. And that gave me the idea that in order to teach well, you have to break everything down into its component pieces so that it can be applied to and learned by all kinds of people, not just one type of people, because these snowboarding instructors, they teach anyone on the slopes. It could be a 7-year-old kid to a working professional, 30 years old, to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's across the spectrum, right? Whoever that turns up in front of you, it could be the grandparent with the grandchild, and basically teach us how to snowboard.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to teach using just one style, one methodology, because everybody on that spectrum learns differently and absorbs information differently. So that was what got me realizing that I needed a framework myself. And that was the basis of super scaling. That was how I wrote the book, Super Scaling. I came up with the methodology, the 5E scale engine, which consists of 5 principles. The 5 principles that you need in order to super scale your business.
So what are they? What are the 5 principles?
The first is, this is another interesting story in itself. It took me about 6 to 9 months to come up with this framework. At first, it was just 3 principles, slowly expanded to 4. And then finally, I got it and I understood the remaining principle that was missing. And then I introduced that and it was finally complete. It was finally the 5 principles. The principle that was missing, I always looked at the business and wondered like what was wrong with the business, right? And that was all that I looked at, until I realized that the 5th principle has nothing to do with the business at all. It was the entrepreneur. It was who you are as a person, the mindsets that you have, the thought processes that you have, the confidence, the beliefs that you have, that will allow you to really scale your business or not. That was the 5th and missing principle. So the 5 principles are: number 1, you, the entrepreneur. So I call it evolve. The second one is envision, because it talks about the vision that you have and how you translate it into something that your team, your customers can see, appreciate, and take action on. The third principle is empower, because then we start looking at the team that you have in a company, whether it's freelancers, contractors, full-time, part-time, whatever, right? These are people that work for you in your organization. We want everybody working on the same page. The fourth is engage. We are looking at the customer journey now from start to end. People tend to look at the start, and I call that the leaky bucket analogy, where your bucket is your business, right? And you're just trying to get water in. Yeah. People try to do that because they focus only on sales and marketing, trying to get as much water to come in, but the bucket is leaking. So all that water is just going to flow out. That's not what we want. We want a bucket that's solid. And so when we look at the business, this whole thing has to be holistic. And that's why the customer journey is 5 parts as well. The fifth principle is execute. And my favorite analogy for this is the analogy of racing with the world's fastest man, Usain Bolt. Mm-hmm. What do you think when I say that I can beat Usain Bolt in that race?
I will say it depends on what type of race it is. If it's a marathon, you can probably beat him. In a sprint, 100-meter sprint, unlikely you will.
Well, I love the confidence that you have in me. Even with a marathon, I'm not even sure whether I could do that. But I think that the one thing that makes it possible is if Usain Bolt runs in the wrong direction. That's how I win. And that's typically the case with businesses. When businesses focus on the wrong things to optimize, to make more efficient, that's literally what happens. They are running in the wrong direction. And so the last principle is execute, because we focus on the points that businesses can then focus on after they've taken care of all the fundamentals. And so I have a framework for that as well, where they go through, again, it was 5 steps that they go through in order to make sure that they optimize and execute upon the things that matter.
So you basically have a coaching and mentoring program wrapped together, which is somewhat of an accelerator. And you have, I understand, 40 plus founders from Singapore, Malaysia, and UK at the moment.
Yes.
So give us some examples of some success stories that you've had in terms of how you've helped your clients grow their business.
I was just speaking to one of them like just 2 days ago. It's the Hey Co from Singapore. It's a holding company. Their operating brands are food brands, and so they are very well known to people. One of the brands is one of my favorites. It's a burger chain called the Wildfire Burgers, and their burgers are epic, right? Great brioche buns, all buttered, and they have like the great meat patty, and it's just amazing. If you come to Singapore, that's one of the burgers that you absolutely should try. So for them, they had a goal, a dream of launching 6 different business brands, 6 different F&B concepts. This was at the middle of 2020, when they first met me. And then when they attended the super scaling program, what we went through was basically the 5 principles, making sure that they could have the management ability to not only create and lead an internal team, but also develop the 6 different concepts and manage it well, so that you don't just develop brands and then after that it falls apart. You develop brands and then they have this framework and methodology to operate upon, such that they become sustainable in themselves.
Yes.
And that's what happens, right? For them, I'm very proud to say that they doubled their company size and they hit their objectives of getting that 6 F&B brands by the end of the year. So that was one of my success stories that I had with the super scaling program that I'm super proud of.
Okay, and what's the plans for super scaling moving forward?
So one of my goals is to hit like 200 coaching clients. People that join the community are part of this journey together, because I feel that as a community, we are stronger than any one single entrepreneur. When I was running Volian back then, the journey was sometimes a bit lonely. I only had my co-founder, and it was very, very, I guess lonely is the word. I didn't know who else to approach. I didn't know how to approach like business problems that I would face. I didn't even know if the things that I was doing was right. There wasn't somebody to bounce ideas off. And so it was such a kind of like this journey of just me and my co-founder. With super scaling, I want to build a community so that entrepreneurs don't have to go through that lonely journey, right? We can go through that together as entrepreneurs, and that's the only thing that I expect and I require from the people that join this community. Everybody needs to be customer centric. They need to be driven. They need to also be willing to share, to receive. And I think together that creates this community that will be so much more powerful than any one of us.
Alvin, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I definitely took a lot out of it. Before we leave, any final words from you?
I just recently got a tattoo. A tattoo.
Okay.
It's a tattoo of a compass and an arrow, because I discovered that a lot of times, if you pursue something that is dear to you, something that's important to you, that is something that is worth doing. For me, as a person, I only discovered that entrepreneurship was something dear to me only recently. But when I discovered that and I went like diving into it, I think that really gave me the purpose that I needed in my life, the clarity, the purpose, the direction that I needed in my life. And if people are listening in, you have something that you want to pursue, something that you're passionate about, something that you want to change, a problem that you want to solve, I would say go for it. I would say spend time, spend effort, be willing to take on the sacrifices necessary to make whatever you're doing a reality. I think that's something that's a worthwhile endeavor and something that's very meaningful.
Thanks for your insights, Alvin. We've been speaking to Alvin Poh, founder and CEO of Super Scaling on Biztech's Startup Show. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.